Hello, everyone, and welcome, Andy Street. It's great to have you here, spending time with us in Wolverhampton South West tonight. Just before we start, Andy, I just wanted to run over a few housekeeping points, and then we'll be good to go. So if you can put any questions, I've got a few initial questions that I'm going to talk through with Andy. If you can put questions in the chat, the moderators will pick them up and they'll feed them through, and we'll ask you questions. If by any chance we don't get through all the questions, we'll send an email and you can send them in, and we'll make sure that they are answered. So we're recording this as well, and we might use clips for social media after, but we just wanted to make you aware of that. The event is going to last an hour, and we'd love to hear those questions. So you can start straight away by feeding them into us. Okay, so Andy, thank you very much for your time. And I just want to say a personal thank you from myself. So when I was first selected in Wolverhampton South West back at the end of 2018 as a candidate, that first year for me was very daunting of how I went about and giving hope to the people of Wolverhampton and giving them something that they could support and vote and back. And your help through that time was phenomenal. I really appreciate that. So thank you with that. Now, most people on the call will know Andy, and you're going to get to know him a lot better through the next hour. But I think as an MP, I work very closely and regularly, week in, week out, we're speaking with my office, Andy's office, each other, and with other MPs across the West Midlands. Andy has solidified a voice for the West Midlands, and he's been able to put it more in front of the ministers more than I can, and he's continually banging the drum for the West Midlands. But the thing that stood out to me about Andy is when he looks you in the eye and tells you he's going to do it, he goes and does it. And when I'm knocking on a door saying, I'm going to get this done, or I'm going to follow up, and then I take it to Andy, it gets done. And that's what has really stood out among many other things. So Andy, as I said, we're delighted to have you here tonight. I find in my office that some people will lose the crossover of where a councillor finishes, where an MP starts, or where you as the West Midlands Mayor sit. So would you give us an overview of your role and what you've done over the last, what would have been 3 years or the 4 years as it's extended? Right, just enlighten everyone on your position and what you've been doing during that time, please.
Yeah, of course, Stuart. And first of all, you were very generous in saying thank you to me for my time. I should thank you and indeed everyone who's joined us for this Ask Andy. Had we not been in the end of the pandemic, we would, of course, been out and about doing it in, I don't know, a church hall, a factory, a community centre, a mosque, somewhere in Wolverhampton South West. But I'm pleased that everyone's joined us tonight. So just a bit of introduction, then of course we'll get to the questions, which is the very purpose of the evening. But the role, I think the most important thing to say about this is it was a new role, and I stepped into this role because I thought it was one that I could probably do given my business background. I'd never wanted to be an MP, sorry, Stuart. I'd never stood for local councillor. I respect what those positions do. This is different. So when the role was created, it wasn't about doing what Wolverhampton City Council do. They're still responsible for parks and refuge and adult social care. And an MP, of course, is still responsible for passing legislation on behalf of the government and indeed representing the city in Westminster. But my role was about new things, and the job description was really very simple. Worry about the economy of the West Midlands and think particularly about the bits where you have direct responsibility that contribute to that. Transport investments, skills development, housing development, and of course, as the role has turned out, it's also a huge bit, and you implied this in your introduction, about sort of championing the region and sort of getting out and selling the West Midlands, and I hope I've done that proudly. Just last reflection is, of course, looking back on nearly 4 years now, it was 3 years of what you might call peacetime. And that was a period where basically the West Midlands performed pretty well. If we'd been having this debate 12 months ago, we'd have said record employment levels, great investment, and things were going pretty well. Of course, the last 12 months has been anything but peacetime, and it's actually been an incredibly difficult, challenging period. And we're left with a very big hit to our economy. And really the debate now, Stuart, is what are we going to do to rebuild that together?
That is a massive question. I'm sure people will ask points on that, and we'll discuss that later in the hour. But I just want to touch on something you said about home building. Yes, we do need homes. Wolverhampton has such a small bit of green space within the city, but our surrounding areas, very nice green belt. How are we going to bridge that divide of building houses but still protecting the green belt, which, as you know, we spoke many times, is very important to myself and many other people in Wolverhampton?
Yeah, so you're right, Stuart. I know how passionately you think about this, and lots of your constituents, particularly on the western flank of your constituency. And for those on the line, Stuart has marched me to the 7 cornfields on wet Saturday mornings to make it really very, very clear. So long as I am mayor, I will oppose the green belt development, whether it be in Wolverhampton technically or actually in South Staffordshire, that abuts Wolverhampton, because quite simply, we do not need to build on that green belt land. It's there. Once it's gone, as everyone always says. We all talk about the climate change emergency. It just seems completely bonkers to dig up our precious green belt for housing. But as you implied in your question, at the same time, we have got to deliver the houses that young people need, but we've managed to do that. So over the last few years, we've doubled the rate of house building in the West Midlands, and we've particularly got 17,000 new homes built per year in each of the last 2 years. That's on target for the number we need, nearly all of them on brownfield sites. So utter commitment to defend the green belt.
Thank you. I've already seen some questions coming in to expand on that green belt, and I'm sure we will explore them definitely, because they are key issues of vital importance. So let's look at another of the main areas of infrastructure. We've got to make sure that infrastructure is key across the region, and I know that you've been well, with your plan across the West Midlands, opening stations. We've already seen some open lines, getting the funding to reopen, and Tettenhall train station. So obviously very important and close to myself. How are you going to work with me and others in the region to see that we can open these areas in Wolverhampton?
Yeah, no, it's a critical question, because actually, if you think what we're really talking about here, this is about how residents can easily get to work, to opportunities, to training, maybe to leisure as well. And the brutal truth is the West Midlands had been hopelessly underinvested in public transport. I used to say the bus system was basically the same as when I went to school 50 years ago. So that says it all, doesn't it, really? And we have begun to make real progress. Just give you one stat. The capital we're spending on public transport investment in the West Midlands now is 5 times what it was in the year before I became mayor. Interestingly, it's still behind the rate in London. We were 1/7. We're now obviously much, much nearer. So we're making good progress. And it's coming straight to the heart of your question, Stuart. If you look at the railway lines, we've already got agreement to reopen Walsall to Wolverhampton lines in South Birmingham, working on Aldridge, of course. And we're now adding a really clear commitment that Tettenhall will be our next one to achieve. And the good thing is, because we've demonstrated we can go through all the rather laborious process of getting lines like Walsall, Wolverhampton open, making the business case, getting the agreement for West Midlands Trains, getting Network Rail to sign it off, everything we've learned, we can now apply to Tettenhall. So we've just made the combined bid to government to reopen that railway line.
Thank you, Andy. And I saw in a very short period of being here that I believe the best thing about Wolverhampton are the residents. But the residents need a city centre that they can be proud of, somewhere they can go shopping and enjoy, eat, and actually really champion that area. And we want people from all around to come to Wolverhampton city centre. Now, with your experience as the CEO of John Lewis, this is something that you know very much about the high street. What are you going to do to help us in Wolverhampton see the high street regenerated? Okay,
so I think I should pay tribute to you in something here, actually, Stuart, because you've already done something very important. But I'm also going to give you a slightly left field answer first off. Most important thing to regenerate the high street in the city centre is to have good jobs in the city centre who brings customers in. And it's only one part of it, but the announcement recently that MHCLG is relocating its second headquarters to Wolverhampton is really important. It's all part of the same jigsaw. Good quality jobs based in the city centre will actually give spending power into the city centres, the cafes, the restaurants, In terms of why I say I must pay tribute to you, I think the success in getting the Towns Fund bid over the line with central government was really important. That's £25 million, begins to give us the opportunity to reshape some of those city centre areas. And you were there lobbying with Jane Stevenson as well with me, and we were able to persuade ministers that that was a really good scheme. Of course, the other thing is transport to the city centre is very important, something I can influence directly if it's easy to get to the city centre. So let's think, for example, of the Black Country Metro. It is going to, we've talked about this for 30 years, this was talked about. And then within a few months of me being mayor, it was being built. And then lo and behold, we actually have that line through the Black Country to Dudley, and you'll be able to travel straight from Dudley to Wolverhampton on the Metro to bring customers in as well. So there's various bits in that answer that you can see will all contribute to the economic vibrancy of the city centre. If you come head on to retail, just two other things I would say. First of all, we've got to deal with business rates. I've been there with the Treasury Select Committee, with any government minister saying these are outdated, it's got to be changed. And of course, it's also why I've been very vociferous with the Chancellor and others saying we've got to give temporary support for retailers for when they reopen, because that will be absolutely critical. It's almost like a dangerous time when you begin to reopen and you have to spend cash on those reopening things. So a number of elements there, Stuart.
Thank you, Andy. And it's something you touched on before. I want to ask one more question before we go to the residents tonight. And you've said about, if this was 12 months ago, we would be saying about amazing figures for employment, the economy is doing X, Y, and Z, but we faced a pandemic. And that has changed a lot of the city and the region. What is regionally happening to kickstart the economy, to get people in work, and to see not just Wolverhampton, but the West Midlands and the country thrive? What have you been doing on that, and what are your plans to work with us to do that?
Yeah, and this is a very important question. Probably worth just giving one or two numbers just so everyone understands the scale of what's happened. So in the first 3 years of me being mayor, the region created 97,000 jobs. We were really, really pleased with the progress. Record employment levels. I know there were some communities where it was still challenging. In the last year, we haven't got the same degree of accuracy, but the claimant count across the region has gone up by 95,000. So there's an obvious symmetry here. All the progress we made in 3 years has been lost in 1 year. So what, to come specifically to your question, what I'm holding in my hand, Exhibit A, it's difficult doing it virtually, is what I call the mayoral jobs plan, getting the West Midlands back to work. We launched this last week, and it is a specific actionable plan now, not fantasy for what we might do in the future, for 100,000 new jobs over the next 2 years. And what it does is it talk about exactly where that 100,000 will come from. Some, of course, are from the obvious things like a recovery of the sectors that are closed down, like hospitality. Some, of course, about getting the best out of some of the big investment schemes that we've just won. For example, all the jobs in HS2 and the housing sector, of course, where we talked about already growing rapidly there, and the construction jobs, of course. We talked about the relocation of MHCLG, just as a specific number as well, and some of the sectors that are going to grow, like the electrification of the automotive sector. But one thing I particularly want to pull out in it, so all the numbers are there if anyone wants to look at the detail, but one thing I particularly want to pull out is, of course, the retraining, particularly of young people who have lost their jobs. And this talks about the things that are being done nationally, 20,000 opportunities through Kickstart. That's young people's employment opportunities, particularly. And then we have the regional pieces, what we're doing about apprenticeships in the region, 2,000 opportunities there, and critically what we're doing with our colleges on what we call sector-based work academies, which is getting people particular skills for the growth areas. And I'll give you a lovely example to finish on that we launched with Wolverhampton College last week, funded by us, to get 720 people trained in jobs as engineers for electrical vehicles. Our current mechanics don't understand electrical vehicles. Wolverhampton College saw the opportunity with us, particular training there. And it's a lovely, precise example about new jobs coming as we change the nature of the economy, as we build back from COVID. But I would encourage anyone frankly, just to have a little look at the detail here, because what I really wanted to do is have a plan which is specific and now. It is not the never, never land in long-term promises that never come to pass.
Just a quick one on that document. Where can people who are watching, where can they access it?
We can put the link, we will get the link in the chat as soon as we can, or I will also, or if you want to mail me directly, and again, you can put my public email there, we can send you a personal copy by email. That might be the easiest way of doing it. If Sahel could just put, or Cameron, just put the links in the chat. Anyone who wants the document, very keen to put it, easy to put it to you directly.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Andy. Now we're going to go to questions from people who've dialed in. And first of all, thank you to everyone who's dialed in tonight, giving up your evening and coming to listen to myself and Andy. And the first question we've got is Dean Knight, and we're going back to Tettenhall train station. So Dean wants to know a bit more about the plans and the timescale for delivery of the new station, and also about the new station. Will people be encouraged to walk or cycle to the station, and what measures are being put in place to ensure parking along key routes doesn't become a problem?
Okay, really interesting question. So the station, by the way, is not at the site of the old Tettenhall Station, before anyone's unclear about this. That whole building's got a lovely new use now. So it's actually just on the sort of, well, we haven't got an exact location, it's on the boundary really between Tettenhall and Penderford, really. So there we are. In terms of timelines, I don't want to overpromise here. We found in other schemes that we've worked on, and I know everyone will sigh when I say this, it's probably at best 2.5, 3 years, the progress it takes to get this through all the approvals. The timetable changes. Oh, the rail industry goes so slowly. But given we've waited 60 years, that's probably not too long to wait. Now then, in terms of the transport to it, really interesting, because we've just had this very hotly debated in some of our other stations that we're opening. So for example, in Darlaston, we're doing a huge car park, almost like a park and ride station. But in Moseley in South Birmingham, the local community said, we don't want that. We actually want it all to be about a local public transport to it. And so and particularly about cycling and walking to it. So big cycle storage. So the honest answer, Stuart, is we will want to engage the community about what they think is right for this station, because we don't have a one size fits all for everyone we're doing across the West Midlands must be the same. And I really want these to serve the unique features of the individual community, if that makes sense. So I want to have that whole debate. What will be clear though, and we've learned this at a lot of stations across the West Midlands, if we don't have a huge car park, we will need to be really strict working with the local council on the restrictions in neighbouring roads, because it is not right that local residents get that parking on their frontages. So we will deal with that.
Thank you, Andy. That key importance there of the engagement with local residents. If I do read your names out wrong, please bear with me. I'm getting them as they come through. The next question, I'm going to read word for word so I get it right for you, Andy, from Kate Brazenell. Andy, you pledged to protect the West Midlands Greenbelt under the duty to cooperate guidelines. Yes. South Staffordshire have had to agree to provide 4,000 homes to the Black Country Plan, all of which will be built on the Greenbelt. Is it okay to ask neighbouring authorities to relinquish Greenbelt whilst protecting West Midlands Greenbelt? Okay,
so I think there's two points here. What we are trying to do is minimise what we need to ask neighbouring authorities to do. So let's just think about this. There is at the moment a requirement for South Staffordshire, that's absolutely right. And as the plan is reworked, that you might call it in loose language, overflow will again be reworked. But for every brownfield site that we redevelop within the conurbation, there is less requirement to ask neighbours to take further placing. So the two things are utterly consistent. And of course, the critical point here is by being very strict about greenbelt in the conurbation, you are in a sense forcing the developers to move to the brownfield sites, because the developer, if given a choice between a perfect greenfield site, let's say in Sutton Coldfield or Solihull or on the edge of Tettenhall, we'll definitely choose that over dealing with a more difficult site within the existing conurbation. So we are encouraging that to happen by being restrictive in terms of those permissions, and we're also encouraging it by putting cash on the table to deal with the viability of brownfield sites. And let's just be clear here, we've now got over £450 million of cash negotiated with central government, which we use to do exactly that. So it is consistent because our approach takes the pressure off the adjoining authorities. And let's just be really clear, it's not of interest to Wolverhampton residents, but this is of incredible import in some areas of the conurbation, which tends to be net takers, and Solihull's the obvious example of that. So this is all coherent. Now, in terms of South Staffordshire, there will still probably be some requirement for additional development there, but it has to be thought about again what is happening within those boroughs as to where they choose to put their development. And I do not believe that it is right for them to put it right on the edge of our conurbation, because frankly, it doesn't make a sustainable community in the sense of what those boroughs are creating. And that's why we will continue to lobby for different development within South Staffordshire. Hopefully, Kate, that is clear. Yeah.
Yeah, that comes up a lot, putting developments on the edge of Wolverhampton where they end up using all the schools, doctors, roads. And so that comes up time and time again. So that's very good to hear that point. So the next one is from Sarah Sylvester. What cyclist routes and paths will be developed, if any, as cycling on roads has become worse with speeding? So what cycle routes are we going to see, or to encourage cyclists around Wolverhampton?
Yes, okay. So cycling in Wolverhampton, slightly different question, but I have to get this in first. I hope, Sarah, you saw that yesterday was the launch of the West Midlands Bike Share Scheme in Wolverhampton. And all credit, Wolverhampton were actually the first borough of the 7 main boroughs to go live with this. We had a little trial in Sutton for the last month. We went live in Sutton yesterday. So hopefully this will get more people onto bikes in Sutton. And we all know the advantages in terms of carbon usage, health, And there will be, I think there's 20 dock stations across Wolverhampton. And I think it's 156 bikes across Wolverhampton, all pedal at this stage. There will become some electric bikes coming up a little later in the year. So get fit on the pedal before the electric comes. And it's worth saying as well, the bikes are made locally in Stratford-on-Avon. So that's a brilliant move forward on bikes. Now then, in terms of the wider question, what we have got is what we call our Starley network. Now, again, people might think, what on earth is he talking about? This is our plan to build out segregated cycle routes. Again, it's all available on public record that we've got. It's a route of about 250 miles of segregated route. So whether that be specifically a separate route on road, or whether it be alongside one of our main transport investments. So it'll go alongside the metro extensions, for example, alongside our sprint extensions, or whether it be a green corridor that we've got there. Now, they're all listed out, and as the cash comes in to work on these, we will steadily sort of colour in the map, basically. You are going to find me out because I cannot remember off the top of my head exactly what the routes are in Wolverhampton. So I'm kicking myself for not preparing for that. But again, you can go and see exactly the map there, which is all agreed to move through the funding of that.
Thank you. And they have got the plans for the cycle routes on the inside of the ring road on the grass area that they've put out to consultation at the moment. And it is key to get more modes of transport around the city. But that leads on to my next question by Tony Chilvers. He's said that you've mentioned the importance of transport. It's not just about getting around. It's a lifeline for certain people, such as senior citizens, SEN, physically disabled in our community. What are your transport plans doing to include people with disabilities to improve their provision?
So, great question. Thank you. And it's not one I hear very often, so it's great to have it, actually. There's probably 3 quick things to answer it. Number one, since I've been mayor, all of the concessionary fares have been maintained, if not advanced. And actually, probably worth saying in terms of bus, which remains the most oft used, all fares have been frozen for 4 years. So that's a pretty dramatic situation. We'd never achieved that before. The second thing to say is that one of the most important forms of transport for disabled and also elderly is the ring and ride service. And you may be aware that 18 months ago, the company that operated that went bust. So we had a very difficult situation on our hands. And as a clear piece of evidence of my commitment to this, under my leadership, Transport for the West Midlands stepped in and operated it directly. And that has maintained that service, which is a lifeline to so many communities, including a lot of disabled customers. And that has now, I'm very pleased to say, that has now been taken on a much more effective operation actually by National Express. And you'll see a steady upgrading of the vehicles, the call centre for booking, which are actually now running directly out of Transport for the West Midlands. So I think really importantly, Stuart, when there was a difficult commercial decision and it wasn't straightforward because it cost money that we hadn't budgeted for, we stepped in to maintain that service. And then, of course, the third thing is the whole question of the improvement of the vehicles that are being used, the steady upgrading of them and the making sure that they all comply with the sort of latest disability arrangements. So the clarity of the messages on them. So all very practical things like that, but all make a difference. And I think we've actually moved forward dramatically in the investment of our rolling stock, both on rail and on bus, to make sure it's the very best possible experience for disabled customers.
Thank you very much, Andy. And we've got Sarah's come back in with another question. When will shop fronts be upgraded to make the city centre look less run down? So this is, we've talked about the regeneration of the high street, but you can see a row of empty shops all run down, and it can really put people off what the city centre could be like.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I haven't got a specific answer, but in terms of we've agreed we're going to do this on so and so a date, and of course it takes a lot of coordination. But I would, and this might come out of the town's plan actually, Stuart. I don't know if this was discussed at the town's board, but I would be absolutely up for what you might call interim uses. A lot of talk at the moment from the government as well about meanwhile uses. Can we take vacant spaces and actually turn them over for arts groups, community groups? Can we put hoardings right along the front to make things look far better than they are? So, and I think that actually, I don't want to pass the buck, but that's much more an issue for the local towns group and the city council rather than immediately for the mayor. So I don't know, Stuart, if you want to pick up anything on this as well.
Well, I had in Chapel Ash, we've got Asylum Art Gallery just round the corner from my offices, and I had a meeting with them pre-COVID, and they talked about the need for artists to have space to put work. And they gave an example of where they'd seen city centres had opened up derelict or empty shop fronts, and they've allowed artists to go in there and showcase them up. And it changes the aesthetics of the high street, which then encourage more shops in, more people want to open up there. And I walked around in Wolverhampton the other day by the casino and All Nations Church, and there's a row where not one shop is open. And if you could do it in an area like that, well, I know they're all closed with restrictions, but they would all close and they were empty. If you do it in an area like that, it really brightens it up. But it's things that, as you say, will probably focus more in the local area, but we need to do that. So the next question from someone you know well, Jay Singh Sohal, our PCC candidate. So Jay's question, I'll read out. Since the closure of the Tettenhall police station by the Labour PCC, we've seen a crime rising locally. He's campaigning to get more police officers out on the streets of Wolverhampton. Will you continue to speak to the current PCC on behalf of the concerned residents about the need for a strong local police presence in Wolverhampton to tackle crime?
Well, it's nice when a question can be answered with a one-word answer, which hasn't happened thus far. But the answer to this question is yes, because let's just be really clear about what's going on here. We've had 9 years of Labour PCCs. In those 9 years, I think we've had 44 police station closures across the West Midlands, 44 police station closures. Now, the current Labour police commissioner is trying to sort of dodge responsibility for this, but the numbers do not lie. So they have definitely had a strategy of taking away frontline stations, and in your patch, Tettenhall was obviously the example, Stuart. So very clearly, I have said the commissioner has actually very recently, and this is why Jay asked the question, tried to sort of entrap me in not challenging him, basically saying we've got to put civil servants into these places and work with him on a plan. But I am architect of the plan to close the stations. It needs to be stopped, and those that have already been closed, we need to think about how we bring back possibly some presence and at least bring back frontline policing in greater numbers, as Jay's question drew out. And I'll be very straightforward about this. A vote for a Conservative police and crime commissioner will deliver that, because the evidence is clear. 9 years of police and crime commissioners from the Labour Party has not delivered that. So very clear, straightforward answer.
Thank you. And that was Adrian Perry also had the concern about what you were doing for crime in the area. And I believe you just covered that.
Well, let me just tell you one other thing, Stuart, because I do think this is important. I mean, I'm not directly responsible for running the police. The PCC is. You may know we had a very frustrating experience 2 years ago when we tried to get agreement democratically for the two roles to be merged, because I'm a huge believer that in time, the whole piece about causes of crime and dealing with crime possibly should have been merged, but we're not there now. And obviously Jay is standing and full support for Jay. But what is interesting about it is I do have some small areas of responsibility for policing, and that's actually on the transport network. And actually, if you look at our record there over the last few years, it is a good record. So we've actually brought down crime on the transport network across the West Midlands quite considerably. And the way we've done that is what we call through the Safer Travel Police, where we have officers out riding the network. We've increased the frontline resource. We've used technology with every one of our transport vehicles now be linked back to a control centre. So if an event happens on the number one bus going through Wolverhampton, we have the CCTV camera of it here and can use our people on the ground to respond to that. And as a consequence, crime on the transport network has fallen. Our public transport is safer, so important for those elderly people we were talking about earlier on. And if you compare that with the PCC's overall record, you can see the difference in approach.
Thank you, Andy. And I've got a really interesting, probably challenging question here from Guy Marsh. And we're going back, as we did say we would, to the brownfield and building on the greenbelt.
Theme here.
So he said, you stated in November 2020, there was no need to build on any greenbelt until 2031.
Yes.
However, the Black Country plan and the South Staffordshire plan are to 2038. So are you saying greenbelt will be lost after 2031, or will further brownfield come forward instead of greenbelt?
Right. Yeah, very good question. So we said 2031 simply because that it was the, and we're categoric about that, simply because that was the point up to which we had certainty and visibility. The truthful answer is we don't have that certainty and visibility that we want beyond in sufficient detail to give a commitment beyond that. But it works like this. If we can regenerate more brownfield sites, possibly the more difficult ones, or if we can densify some of our redevelopment areas, so there might not be a derelict site, but there might be an opportunity to change and improve, like an estate regeneration, for example, then we could do more, and then we could extend the lifetime of that greenbelt pledge beyond 2031. But we had not got certainty over it, sir, and that's why I stuck at that date. To be very clear, though, what we must now do on the back of the success that we have had so far is push to those more difficult areas and those more innovative ideas.
Thank you, Andy. And just to follow on from Guy again, he said, if you agree about brownfield first, can you tell us why the City of Wolverhampton Council are still looking at the 7 Cornfield site?
Well, they shouldn't be. It's very straightforward. They shouldn't be. I mean, you only have to go and stand in it and look at it. It would be an absolute travesty to do that. When you look at, let's be blunt about this. You come in on the train to Wolverhampton. I did it only yesterday morning. Coming on the train to Wolverhampton Station, and you see the canal side area immediately to the south, and you think we've been talking about this area for 4 years now. Nothing's happened. Why not? You talk about Horsley Fields next to it. There is interim use of that, to be totally fair, but there are a number of big sites in the centre of Wolverhampton that we should be making more progress on. And it's back to my earlier point. If you make it easier for a developer to go to Seven Cornfields rather than to Canal Side, that is what they will do. So we should be absolutely robust over this and follow that brownfield first approach. And a big development, the Brewers Yard development. How long has it taken us to get actually a spade in the ground there? 2 years after the announcement. The combined authority stands ready to support that, and we're not going as fast as we should be going.
Thank you, Andy. Very clear on those points. So next one, back to jobs and within the healthcare profession. Dr. Sanjeev Sinha, any specific plans to train and retain healthcare workers, considering there is a big push to increase the numbers of physician associates, paramedics, and social prescribers, to name a few? Yes,
great question. So actually, you were saved from me reading every one of the points in the 100,000 plan earlier on. It does actually particularly call out this sector as an area where there will definitely be more employment opportunities. Now, some will come naturally. So let's just think about the increase in nursing provision, and actually our universities, including Wolverhampton, are doing a brilliant job on that. But some will need a bit more intervention, as you say. So one of the areas we're preparing for it. I'm expecting the combined authority to step into in this retraining piece. We focused on construction, we focused on digital, but this is the next one. So we will be putting together programs with our universities, with our FE colleges, to actually get people retrained in some of exactly the skills you've talked to. And it'll be literally a matter of weeks when we announce these programs. But actually, I agree, yes, it is a really good opportunity. And if I've been slightly provocative, I was not a Brexiteer, but even I can see that there is obviously a need to train more people domestically, given that we're not going to draw in people to support our health service in quite the same way as we did from European sources before. So that's the other sort of catalyst for us knowing we've got to step into this.
Thank you, Andy. And I'll just reiterate the importance of the 100,000 jobs and the plan Andy's put together. Please follow that link and pick that up, because this is one of the major things we'll be facing in the region, and a clear constructive plan is definitely the way forward. So I've got a few people I haven't put their names to this. We need ITV Central up in our region, as we do not have any programs from ITV coming out of the Midlands. And what the person is trying to say is, how do we showcase the best of the West Midlands?
Okay, brilliant. So watch this space. So I'll be honest about this. People sometimes say to me, what was disappointments in your time as mayor? And one of them actually was when we didn't win Channel 4. Now, I know it was to be located in Birmingham, but nevertheless, it was a West Midlands piece. We didn't win it. And after that, I thought, that was bad. It was a setback. But we had to be honest. We didn't have the strength in the industry to make the case well enough, the whole TV and film production industry. So I decided then we were going to do something about it. Now, what you have already seen is that there is the progress towards Stephen Knight, the creator of Peaky Blinders, currently wonderfully filmed, of course, in Dudley, but he is going to be building the Mercian Studios in Birmingham. We announced 2 weeks ago that we're now creating a hub for the independent film and TV sector there as well. We called it rather unsexily the Creative Content Hub, but that's agreed, 18 million of funding for that. And then the third thing we are working on is, it's not ITV, but it's a deal with the BBC. And I personally, and this might surprise you that this falls to the mayor, I personally have been having conversations with the new Director General of the BBC to say, you could provide that really catalytic investment. And the reason I say watch this space is I do believe we will have an announcement on this very, very shortly. And I do think it'd be a good announcement for the West Midlands. Now, the reason why this is so important, as well as just the direct jobs, is what I call the portrayal. We need to see our region more on national television. To be very honest, I've started with the BBC because that is by far and away the biggest commissioner of programmes directly. ITV does not actually commission that many programmes directly itself in the same way. So we've kicked off with the BBC, but to be really clear, this film studio is also designed to secure Netflix and everything else. And we had to build the capability to actually say to any broadcaster, we've set ourselves up well, we're ready to make this here for you. And I'm actually much more optimistic than I was when we lost that race 2 years ago. And it's a classic example. Is sometimes you lose from you learn from your setbacks in life as to what you've got to do. And we've tried to learn from that.
Thank you. Now, this is an interesting one because I often have different debates on this, and it's about the pedestrianisation of the city centre. And as you'll know, some of the High Street Fund and the Towns Fund, some areas of Wolverhampton city centre are going to be pedestrianised. So people want to know, how is this going to impact some of the elderly or disabled residents? And at the moment, the words of this person are, the city is an absolute nightmare to access with car or public transport with how the roads are going to be structured. So I know that residents have concerns. If you can't get a car in, it might be all right for me who's able to walk the distance, but slightly different with my wife who might want to take a 2-year-old walking up there, or someone in a wheelchair or elderly. So what's your views on this, Andy?
My view is that, as ever in so many things in British public life, a bit of pragmatism matters. I'm a believer in pedestrianisation because I think actually that does tend to bring about a real quality feel of a place, but it has to be done brilliantly. And it not necessarily always is done brilliantly. If you look at the little area around Victoria Square, just by the bus station, I think that's actually been done pretty well. It's not fully pedestrianised, but there's big restrictions. The quality of the public realm there is good. So I would call that out as a good example, actually, of where quality investment has been made, actually. But you can't just pedestrianise everything and think the city centre is going to work. And so what you've got to do is plan it really carefully with a relatively small number, probably, of accessible points, which you do make accessible maybe for people with disabled badges. You make them accessible at particular times of day to service buildings, because that has to be done. And it can be done in a proper, planful way. But the sort of potential to upgrade a place, green a place, improve public realm, I do think that is part of the regeneration of city centres, that it's places that people want to spend time, actually. And by the way, maybe not for everybody, but the electric bikes and the other bikes, they are there to help people navigate through the city. And it's very, very cheap, 5 pence a minute. So, you know, that can be part of the solution. You come to the edge of the city, you get on your bike, you move through in that way. But you do have to think about disabled access as well.
And that perfectly leads me on to this one from MT Harris. You're talking about cycling. Some people won't be interested in cycling. So how do we ensure that these cycle routes are not at the detriment of car users?
Because you make sure, and this is what the earlier question was drawing out, actually, you make sure that where you can, you have them segregated. And frankly, that is the right thing to do anyway, because of the safety in cyclists and car users on old-fashioned British roads, which are very narrow. It's not the best solution. So the best solution is definitely proper segregation. And sir, you'll be pleased to know the cycling lobbyists are always saying to me, that's what we really need. So green routes through parkland canals and dedicated routes are actually the right answer. But of course, if you do have a low traffic zone in the city centre, some pedestrianised, that is appropriate for short cycle hops. And
I just got to make a correction. That question wasn't from MT Harris. This one was. I was reading the question above and below.
Mr. or Mrs. Harris, yes, my apologies.
That was a genuine question. The person didn't leave their name. So MT Harris has said, is there a protection order on council trees? What can the individual taxpayer do to get regular maintenance? I have been trying to speak to Wolverhampton Council about this for over 20 years. And I can add after you've spoke on this as well, Andy.
A tree, you say?
Yes. They were looking for regular maintenance on trees. This person has been requesting for maintenance on council trees over the last 20 years to Wolverhampton Council.
I thought, you sure the question isn't, I thought the question was about protection of tree.
Is there a protection order on council trees? And what? So what I read from this is, I believe the individual wants maintenance on trees, but might have been told that there's a protection order on council trees.
So there is nothing to stop you asking a council to maintain a tree for it to be safe, not to intrude into your property in any way, basically. So there's nothing to prevent that. I thought you were fishing, though, for this question about can trees be protected against development, and we do have some. We have this actually when we do.
Please answer that one in case that's what the person wants as well.
And of course, the answer there is that we will do all that we can to protect a tree in terms of incorporating it in a plan for redevelopment. But if we do, and this definitely happened with the Metro building, if we do have to take down the trees, we will always replace them more than 1 for 1. But we can always actually get the order to take a tree down if that's what this is about, but it's the last resort.
Okay, and just if there's any specific points from residents of Wolverhampton South West, I know that's a local issue, but we've taken up so many local issues and we can work with the council to solve any of those issues. And Sohail, if you could put in my contact from the office if people have a specific local issue for me to pick up. Put that in the chat, please. Thank you. So, Andy, anonymous, but are there any plans to roll out electric scooters in Wolverhampton?
Yes. So the electric scooter trial that obviously the questioner has seen. Now, let me just get this right now. In Birmingham and Sandwell has been an incredible success, actually. So I think the number is 55,000 unique journeys so far, even during a period of lockdown. And interestingly, none of them are be dramatic thrown in the canal, which is what we were worried about. So it's not for everybody. It's very much, it tends to be a young person's thing, but it is, again, part of this question that came up earlier on. Short hops, people do want to use it, and actually it's been incredibly well received. So that's given Sandwell Council the confidence to extend it. We've got a trial as well at Warwick University in Coventry, and I believe that negotiations between Transport for the West Midlands and Wolverhampton are now underway. And again, it's another option is the way I would put it, really.
Thank you. I'm going to enjoy asking you this, knowing which football team you support and being in Wolverhampton at the moment with the mighty Wolves. So this is from Dave from Tettenhall. One of the biggest losses of the pandemic has been the loss of live sport and fans in venues.
Yeah,
I'm a season ticket holder at the Molineux. How are you planning to encourage things to get fans back once again?
Yeah, great question. And you'll be interested to know that one of the more pleasurable things I did in the last few weeks was have a conference call with the CEOs of all of the West Midlands football and rugby clubs. And it was great, actually. And what was really interesting about it was two things. First of all, there's an absolute determination on all of the clubs to get people back as quickly as possible, even if they were just doing a small number of people, as was done between the second and third lockdowns. And frankly, for a club like the Wolves, if they could only have 2,000 people on a trial, it would probably be loss-making, but an absolute determination for them to get that back as soon as possible. So at the moment, there is an indication from central government of a date for return of fans. And the conversation I've been having with ministers all the way through this is give them a date for which they can plan. What the clubs keep saying to me is, even if it's some way away, let's have a date, then we can make a really good job of the planning. And they've got to think, of course, about what might be the requirements for testing before people come in, maybe not for a small trial, say 2,000 people, but if we were filling Molineux, that might be required. So yeah, I've been active in those conversations, a bridge with government, and I genuinely believe that we will at the beginning of next season, unlikely to be this season. I don't actually know the Wolves fixture well enough as to whether you are one of the half of clubs that in theory would get one home game if the date of the 17th of May is the date that we go with, or whether you're in the other half of clubs who don't. But to be honest, it's really planning for next season. And I think we can be pretty confident that we will aim to get everybody back. And that will probably include some form of pre-testing, not at the venue on the day, but where you just have to demonstrate, if you haven't had a vaccine, that you have had a test fairly recently.
Thank you. I'm conscious we've got 9 minutes left. I know you've touched on this question. Kaylee remembered growing up in the 80s, and the big cornerstone of life was the high street. And
Yes.
I know how important this is to so many, but it's sad in the modern day that high street seems to be dying. What are your thoughts, and what can we do to save these precious gems?
Okay, yeah, it's critical question. We've had a number of questions where we've talked about things we can do. Let's call it in the round, bringing in spending power, improving transport, but let's get straight to what can happen with high streets. The first thing that's got to happen is there does need to be a change in the business rate system. Might seem a slightly esoteric answer to the question, but it is completely wrong. And I've been arguing this for a number of years, that retailers in the middle of Wolverhampton are paying business rates, and a warehouse delivering Amazon deliveries, actually the nearest to you is in Cannock, is paying a fraction of that. That cannot be right, and there has to be very serious reform of that to get to a level playing field. Now, the next thing I would say is retail, whatever we do with that, is not going to bounce back in quite the same way as it was. Some of it has gone online and probably gone forever. And I'll just be slightly cheeky. I suspect everyone on the call has got their Amazon packaging somewhere in their recycling bin. So we just examine all of our own behavior for what's really driving this. But you can do things then to concentrate on the revival of the high streets. First of all, more people will live in town centres. That is a thoroughly good thing, because it brings in spending power, makes places more vibrant after work and shopping hours, and it actually builds sustainable communities. We definitely need to do that more in the middle of Wolverhampton, and that's what a scheme like the Brewers Yard scheme is designed to do. The next thing we have to think about is much more leisure activities in city centres. I am still a huge believer that we're sociable animals. We're all caged up waiting to get out. Let's see what's going to be the new leisure. And if you take, it's not in Wolverhampton, but I think it's fascinating because they are probably Britain's best retail landlord. If you look at the Bullring Centre in Birmingham, when it opened, all retail. If you look at it now, 40% of it food and drink and leisure, and you can see what happens change there. That will happen in our town centres as well. And then the other element that I'm very, very keen on is actually thinking about what public services will be in our city centres. Is it right that to go for a health screening, you have to go somewhere else? Or should it be right there where there's maximum foot flow, all the roads lead to, And then one last thought that we want to do. Brilliant example, just over the border in Darlaston, this has been done, where we've actually got now a big business incubation centre. So some of those buildings should be turned into uses like that. So what I hope comes out of that answer is we can't put the clock back to exactly how it was, but there is still an incredible logic to a city centre where people come together, where all those social uses are, and we've got to get, in a sense, behind those changes and reinvest behind them. And that, of course, going back to where we started, is what the Towns Fund application that Stuart sat on the board for was all about.
Thank you, Andy. And here's a really important question from John from Penn. Now, health and well-being. Yes. So we don't often touch on this, but COVID has brought something to all of our attention. Looking after ourselves matters. The correlation between physical condition and, in particular, cardiovascular fitness being affected by COVID is stark. Unfortunately, in a black country, we perform quite poorly in public health figures. Correct. How do you propose to increase physical exercise and increase the health and well-being of the region?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me just say one other thing about it as well. If you look within the black country at the different communities by ethnicity, we also see some incredibly stark and difficult comparisons as well. And we know that the BME communities have been far more adversely affected by COVID. So we are being entirely honest about this is the most important thing to say to answer the question head on. And again, I won't put another link in the chat because it looks too bureaucratic. But one thing I'm actually, dare I use the word, pleased about, that we have done an incredibly honest report called The Health of the Region. And in that report, we examine why it is that some communities in the West Midlands, by geography, by ethnicity, by class actually, and deprivation, why they have suffered worse. And then it gives commitments as to what we are going to do about it. And so the 50 commitments, some not many are with the WMCA, some are with the health trusts, some are with local authorities, some are with the CCG through the GPs. And as part of that, there is a real commitment to trying to deal with underlying levels of physical activity. So whether it be social prescribing is the particular sort of jargon word, where we'd actually be saying to somebody who may have a mental health issue, let's say, which ends up with them not looking after themselves, getting obese, and then suffering from a physical thing. We would actually be talking about how are we going to address that with social prescribing, where you might actually be prescribed some exercise activities as a way of addressing your mental health issues. So there's a hell of a lot behind this, but I hope we've at least started to be honest about some of the underlying issues, and we are putting resource into some of those preventative health pieces, and we're asking government to continue to support us in what we call a radical health prevention fund to get absolutely to that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one final question. If you haven't had your question answered today, please submit it to the email that we put in the chat, because we do want to answer them, but we're just going to run out of time. So final question before we sum up, Andy. Do you have any plans for localised youth club facilities?
The honest answer is no, but so let me explain. So youth services is actually a local authority, not a combined authority provision, but maybe something I would call out to you that I think that I think you're welcome from the tone of the question. Obviously, the employment situation is most stark for youngsters. So part of our response has been to launch what we call our youth hubs. Now that is like a one-stop shop place for support for young people. The one in Wolverhampton is actually housed in the Way, which I'm sure you know is a wonderful facility. And that gives you everything from where do you go for some of these training programs I've talked about, if you want to have a mentoring program, if you want to have some particular health advice, what college programs are on, all of these things. It's a one-stop location for young people. And I would thoroughly recommend it. If you want an online, so we've done the physical version of the youth hub in the Way, and then there is an online version of it that we call the youth platform, which again, you could just go into the website and put in WMCA or West Midlands Youth Platform, and it's all there. And the idea is every single piece of resource advice for young people, including the youth coaches that the DWP offer, will all be there available at those sites. So it's not quite a youth centre in the sense of the question was asking, but I hope it is in what I'm responsible for, leading straight into what lies behind the question.
Thank you, Andy. And that brings us to the end of the evening. I'd like you just to open the floor again to yourself as we would in a normal building. And just what would you like to sum up with to the great residents of Wolverhampton? How would you like to finish on? What would you like to say to them?
Well, I think the most important thing to say, first of all, is thank you. I mean, I can't believe how many questions we've got through. I know there's some left over, but incredible variety. So I've enjoyed it. And what I hope comes out of it, and I think it's perhaps the most important thing to reflect on, is that we've all learned from COVID. And I think we've learned that actually our communities are incredibly strong. And actually, as someone who's tried to lead the region, it's been very humbling seeing the strength of that community. And the sort of theme that goes through so many of the answers is we do really want to work with that strength of community and make sure that what we've learned through the last year is put to very good effect as we try to build back, as the jargon goes, build back better. But it's been a learning curve for me the last year, and I think we're genuinely well placed to try to re-establish the leadership of the West Midlands if we can harness all that strength we've seen in the last year in your community, Stuart, like so many others.
Thank you very much. I want to say thank you. As I opened up, what I said about Andy is what he says, he delivers. We've had the last 12 months has changed the world. We need a strong plan moving forward. And I know that the plan that Andy has, he will deliver because he has buy-in from everyone, cross-party, across the region. People respect him and they know that if he says he's going to do it, he's do it. So I'm looking forward to working for you for many years to come. I want that to be the case, Andy. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for everything that you've planned, and here's to you looking to do this for many years to come. Thank you again for coming and joining us tonight. And thank you for everyone for those questions. They were great. Sorry we couldn't answer them all, but they were coming thick and fast, and they were great questions. And once again, Wolverhampton shines in everything that we do around this. So thank you, everyone, and good night.
Good night.